You are my Luna in name only, Lisa. Today, the pack gets a true queen. David's voice was cold, echoing off the marble pillars of the great hall. But it was the silence that followed that shattered her. Lisa didn't flinch. She watched, her spine steel, as her husband, the Alpha King, took the ancient obsidian crown, the one meant for her, and lowered it onto the golden hair of Seraphina, his mistress. Gasps rippled through the gathered elite. The coronation of a mistress was unheard of. Her pack, her people, watched her humiliation. She was supposed to scream, to weep, to beg. Instead, Lisa smiled, a small, terrifyingly calm smile. Because David didn't know. He was crowning a queen of a kingdom that, as of midnight tonight, no longer belonged to him. The great hall of the Silver Pine Citadel was suffocating. Thousands of crystal sconces cast a fractured, agonizingly bright light over the assembly. The air tasted of ozone and expensive perfume, sharp with the collective anxiety of the pack's highest-ranking members. They were a sea of silk and tailored suits, their eyes darting between the dais and the solitary figure standing at the base of the steps. Lisa, she wore a gown the color of midnight, devoid of jewels. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, accentuating the sharp lines of her cheekbones and the terrifying calm in her storm-gray eyes. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped loosely in front of her. On the dais, Alpha King David stood tall, radiant in ceremonial white and gold. He was a striking man, his features carved from granite, his presence usually a gravity that pulled everyone toward him. But today, the gravity felt fractured. Beside him stood Seraphina. She was weeping delicately, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking every inch the overwhelmed, virtuous maiden finally receiving her due. For too long, David's voice boomed, magically amplified, washing over the silent crowd. Silver Pine has been guided by duty, not passion. By arrangement, not destiny. He didn't look at Lisa. He couldn't. The goddess decrees that an alpha's true strength lies with his fated mate. A bond forged in spirit, not in the ink of old treaties. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The old treaties were the only reason Silver Pine hadn't been swallowed by the encroaching northern territories. Treaties negotiated by Lisa's father. Treaties maintained by Lisa's tireless, unacknowledged diplomacy. David gestured to the high priest, an elderly wolf who looked profoundly uncomfortable. The priest held a velvet cushion. Upon it sat the moonstone crown, not the heavy obsidian king's crown, but the delicate, intricate diadem of the Luna. The queen's crown. Lisa felt the collective intake of breath. This was it. The public execution of her status. She remembered the night, 5 years ago, when David had awkwardly presented her with a simple silver band. An alliance, Lisa, for the pack. He hadn't loved her then. She had known that. But she had loved the pack. She had poured her blood and sweat into modernizing their infrastructure, securing their borders, and managing the delicate egos of the regional alphas, while David trained the warriors and basked in the glory of their strength. She had built the foundation he was currently standing on. I, David of Silver Pine, Alpha King, do hereby declare Seraphina of the Riverfall Pack as my fated mate, and therefore the true Luna and queen of this realm. He took the moonstone crown. Lisa's gaze didn't waver. She focused on the intricate carving of a wolf howling at the moon above the archway. If she looked at him, she might shatter. Not from a broken heart that had calcified months ago when she first smelled Seraphina's cloying jasmine scent on his collar, but from the sheer, burning injustice of it. He placed the crown on Seraphina's head. The silence that followed was not the awestruck hush of a sacred ceremony. It was the tense, vibrating silence of a bomb waiting to detonate. The pack elite didn't cheer. They didn't howl. They stared. They stared at Serafina, who was now beaming tearfully, looking like a child playing dress-up in her mother's jewelry. And then, as one, they turned their heads. They looked at Lisa. She met their gaze, row by row. General Marcus, whose troops were armed with silver alloy weapons Lisa had secured the funding for. Lady Eleanor, whose trade routes were protected by agreements Lisa had drafted. Councilman Thorne, whose embezzlement Lisa had quietly covered up in exchange for his unwavering loyalty. She saw pity in some eyes, outrage in others. But mostly she saw calculation. David turned, expecting the customary roar of approval. His smile faltered as the oppressive silence dragged on. "Rejoice for your queen," he ordered, a sharp edge entering his tone. A scattered, half-hearted smattering of applause broke out, mostly from David's immediate guard and Serafina's small entourage. It sounded pathetic in the massive hall. Lisa finally let her gaze drop to David. He met her eyes then, a flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossing his face. She offered him a slow, deliberate nod. A concession, or so it seemed. She turned on her heel, the heavy silk of her dress sweeping the polished floor, and began to walk down the central aisle. The crowd parted for her instantly, leaving a wide, respectful berth. "Where are you going?" David's voice snapped, amplified and harsh. "The ceremony is not over. You will swear fealty to the new Luna." Lisa paused, halfway to the doors. She didn't turn around. She merely tilted her head slightly over her shoulder. "I swear fealty to the pack, David," she said, her voice quiet, unamplified, yet it carried clearly through the breathless hall. "And the pack knows its own." She resumed her walk, pushing through the heavy oak doors and out into the crisp evening air, leaving the newly crowned queen and her alpha king drowning in an ocean of silence. The first domino had fallen. The air in Lisa's private study, located in the east wing of the citadel, far from the royal apartments David had recently moved Serafina into, was cool and smelled faintly of dust and aged paper. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of the great hall. Here, there were no crystal chandeliers, only practical desk lamps illuminating stacks of ledgers, maps, and encrypted hard drives. This room was the true beating heart of Silver Pine. Lisa stood by the large window overlooking the training grounds. Below, the moonlight caught the glint of steel as the night watch patrolled. They were David's soldiers, sworn to him. But armies needed to eat. They needed weapons. They needed the intricate web of logistics that David found tedious. A soft knock broke the quiet. "Enter," she said, not turning away from the window. The door clicked shut, and the subtle scent of pine and leather filled the room. Elias, her chief of staff, head of intelligence, and the only man in the pack who knew exactly what she was capable of. "It's done," Elias said, his voice a low rumble. He stepped into the light, a tall, lean man with sharp features and a perpetually cynical expression. "The accounts are frozen." Lisa finally turned. All of them. The royal discretionary funds, the primary trade tariffs, the border security escrows. Everything that requires a secondary authorization signature. He paused, a ghost of a smirk touching his lips. Which, as it turns out, is everything. "And the regional alphas?" "I sent the encrypted messages as soon as the crown touched the Riverfall girl's head. They are aware of the shift in executive authority." Lisa walked over to her desk and traced the worn leather binding of a large ledger. David thinks ruling is about presence, about standing on a balcony and looking strong. He forgets that power isn't a crown. Power is the supply line, When she had discovered the affair, she hadn't confronted him. Confrontation was for the weak. It gave the opponent a chance to prepare. Instead, she had spent the last 6 months quietly, meticulously untangling David from the financial and logistical infrastructure of the pack. She had shifted assets, renegotiated contracts under her sole name, and slowly built a shadow government that operated right under his nose. He was the face on the coin, but she controlled the mint. He'll try to access the funds tomorrow morning to pay for the coronation banquet, Elias noted, consulting a tablet. The catering guild alone is owed a small fortune. Let them bounce, Lisa said smoothly. Let the guildmaster bring his complaints directly to the new Luna. Let's see how Serafina handles an angry mob of bakers. It won't just be the bakers, Elias warned, his tone turning serious. The Northern Alliance tribute is due in 3 days. If we default, they'll see it as a sign of weakness. They might cross the border. Lisa's eyes hardened. I'm aware. That's why I need you to arrange a meeting with General Marcus. Quietly. Elias raised an eyebrow. Marcus is David's most loyal hound. Marcus is loyal to the pack's survival, Lisa corrected. He knows David's tactical brilliance is useless without my strategic planning. He knows who authorized the upgrades to his armory. And more importantly, he knows Serafina's Riverfall pack has ties to the Northern Alliance. Elias frowned. You think she's a spy? I think she's an opportunist, Lisa said, sitting behind her desk. And David is too blinded by his fated bond to see the strategic nightmare he's invited into our bedchamber. He thinks he's claimed a prize. He doesn't realize he's swallowed a poisoned pill. She opened the ledger. It wasn't numbers inside, but names. A complex web of alliances, favors owed, and secrets kept. We need to ensure the military understands the reality of the situation before David realizes he's broke. Lisa continued. Once Marcus sees the ledgers, he'll understand that David cannot sustain a war without me. And if Marcus takes this to David? He won't. Lisa closed the ledger with a soft thud. Because Marcus is pragmatic. He knows David will demand blind loyalty over logic. And logic dictates that right now, David is a liability. Elias nodded slowly. You're orchestrating a bloodless coup. I am protecting my pack from a fool, Lisa corrected sharply. He stripped me of a title. I am stripping him of a kingdom. Let him have his fated mate. We will see how much love sustains them when the treasury is empty and the borders are falling. She looked up at Elias, her expression resolute. Set the meeting with Marcus for dawn. The real work begins now. The sun rose over Silverpine, painting the citadel in hues of gold and rose, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within its walls. In the opulent king's suite, David woke to the soft breathing of Serafina beside him. He smiled, a genuine expression of contentment that hadn't graced his features in years. He felt complete, vitalized by the presence of his fated mate. The tension of the previous night, the suffocating silence of the great hall, felt like a distant memory. The pack would adjust. They always did. They just needed time to see Serafina's true heart. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and moved to his private study attached to the bedroom. It was time to deal with the mundane realities of the day. The coronation banquet, a lavish affair intended to celebrate their union, was scheduled for that evening. He tapped the intercom connecting him to his financial secretary. Barnaby, authorize the final payments to the catering guild and the florists, and ensure the decorators have whatever they need. There was a long pause, filled with static. Barnaby. Alpha, the voice crackled, sounding thin and terrified. I I cannot execute that order. David frowned, leaning closer to the intercom. What do you mean you cannot execute it? Do it immediately. Alpha, the accounts, they are frozen. All of them. Frozen? By whom? The authorization requires a dual signature, Alpha. Yours and the former Luna's. Without her cipher, the system rejects the transfer. David stared at the speaker, uncomprehending for a moment. Then, a slow, hot flush of anger crawled up his neck. Override it. I am the Alpha King. I have tried, sir. The Banking Guild insists the protocols were updated 3 months ago. The secondary authorization is absolute. They say they cannot release funds without Lady Lisa's direct approval. Get her on the line. Now. Sir, Lady Lisa left the Citadel shortly before dawn. Her whereabouts are currently unknown. David slammed his fist onto the desk, fracturing the polished mahogany. The sharp crack echoed through the suite, startling Serafina awake. She appeared in the doorway, clutching the silk sheets to her chest, her eyes wide with alarm. David? My love, what's wrong? He took a deep breath, forcing his features to compose themselves. Nothing, my sweet. Just a minor administrative hiccup. Go back to sleep. He turned back to the intercom. Find her. Send the guard. Tear the city apart if you have to. But as he issued the order, a cold realization began to seep into his anger. Lisa wasn't hiding. She was making a point. Meanwhile, miles away, in a secluded training compound deep within the Silver Pine Forest, Lisa sat across from General Marcus. The air smelled of damp earth and sweat. Marcus, a massive wolf with silvering hair and a face scarred by countless battles, stared at the document spread across the rough-hewn table. He traced the lines of numbers, his thick finger pausing over the highlighted figures. These are the projected supply costs for the winter border patrols, Lisa said, her voice even. You'll notice the deficit. Marcus grunted. A massive deficit. Where is the reserve? Frozen, Lisa replied simply. Under my sole control. Marcus leaned back, crossing his massive arms. His pale blue eyes were unreadable. You've essentially declared war on your own Alpha, Lisa. I am preventing my Alpha from destroying our pack, she countered. Look at the next page, Marcus. The Riverfall accounts. Marcus flipped the page, his brow furrowed as he read. These are significant transfers, from Riverfall accounts to dummy corporations in the Northern Alliance territories. Serafina's brother is heavily indebted to the Northern warlords, Lisa explained. She didn't come to David for love. She came for our treasury. She needs Silverpine wealth to pay off her family's debts before the Northerners collect in blood. Marcus's jaw tightened. The Northern Alliance was their greatest threat. The idea of Silverpine funds lining their enemies' pockets was treason. Are you certain of this intelligence? Elias secured the banking records himself, Lisa said. David is blinded by the mate bond. He doesn't see that he's invited a parasite into the host. If I take this to him, he won't believe you, Lisa interrupted. He will see it as an attack on his mate. He will strip you of your rank and replace you with someone malleable. Someone who won't question when our border defenses are weakened to fund Riverfall's debts. Marcus stared at the documents, the silence stretching long and heavy. He was a soldier. He believed in chain of command, but he also believed in the survival of his people, above all else. What are you asking of me, Lisa? I am asking you to hold the line, she said, leaning forward. When David demands you mobilize the guard to find me or to enforce his will regarding the accounts, I need you to stall. I need you to demand payment up front. I need the military to remain neutral. Neutrality is insubordination in the face of a direct order. It's survival, Lisa said softly. David is a king without a treasury. By tonight, the city will know. The merchants will riot when they aren't paid. The regional alphas are already holding back their tithes. He will look to you to enforce order. If you do, you become the tyrant's fist. If you don't, he falls. Marcus finished grimly. He realizes his limitations. Lisa corrected. I don't want his crown, Marcus. I want him to understand that a crown is just a piece of metal without the infrastructure supporting it. I need him to see that he needs me. Marcus looked at the woman sitting across from him. Calm, calculating, utterly ruthless in her defense of the pack. He thought of the weeping girl who had been crowned the night before. There was no comparison. He slowly gathered the documents and pushed them back toward her. The military cannot operate without proper funding, Marcus said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Until the supply chain issues are resolved and the troops are paid, the Silver Pine Guard is confined to barracks. For training exercises. Lisa allowed herself a small, tight smile. The military was secured. Thank you, General. As she left the compound, her secure phone vibrated. It was a message from Elias. The decorators have walked out. The Great Hall is half finished. David is tearing the citadel apart. Lisa slipped the phone back into her pocket. The sun was fully up now, bright and unforgiving. The day was just beginning. By mid-afternoon, the Silver Pine Citadel felt less like a royal residence and more like a besieged fortress. The frantic energy of the morning had soured into a tense, suffocating dread. David stood in the center of the great hall, his hands on his hips, breathing heavily. The space was a disaster. Half-draped banners hung limply from the balconies. Crates of wilting, unpaid-for lilies were stacked haphazardly near the dais. The long banquet tables were bare, the catering staff having abandoned their stations hours ago when the banking guild formally rejected David's frantic, handwritten notes of credit. "Where is she?" David bellowed, the sound echoing mockingly in the vast, empty room. Elias, who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, stood calmly near the entrance. He held a sleek tablet, his expression a mask of polite indifference. Lady Lisa's location remains unknown, Alpha. Her tracker was disabled shortly after she left the Citadel. Disabled? By whom? By her, I presume, Elias replied. She is, after all, the one who designed the security protocols. David swore loudly, kicking a crate of lilies. The wood splintered, sending white petals scattering across the polished floor. Serafina hovered near the doorway, wringing her hands. She wore a simple day dress, a far cry from the elaborate gown she had planned to wear for the banquet. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "David, please, you're scaring me." David immediately softened, crossing the room to take her hands. "I'm sorry, Sarah. This is just a misunderstanding. Lisa is being petty. She's throwing a tantrum because she lost her title." "But the banquet," Serafina whispered, looking at the desolate hall. "My family is arriving soon. What will they think?" "They will think we are dealing with a recalcitrant former mate," David said, though his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. He turned back to Elias. "Call Marcus. Have him send a detachment to the city center. The merchants are protesting outside the gates. Disperse them." "General Marcus has confined the guard to barracks, Alpha," Elias said smoothly, tapping his tablet. "He cites a lack of operational funding for field deployments." David froze. The blood drained from his face. "Marcus? Marcus defied a direct order?" "He didn't defy it, Alpha," Elias corrected gently. "He merely stated a logistical impossibility. Soldiers cannot operate without logistical support that is currently..." frozen. The reality of his situation finally seemed to pierce David's anger. It wasn't just a tantrum. Lisa hadn't just taken the money, she had taken the infrastructure. She had paralyzed the kingdom in less than 12 hours. "Get me Thorne," David commanded, his voice tight. Councilman Thorne was the head of the civilian council, a slippery man, but one who usually bowed to power. "Have him convene an emergency session. We will vote to seize her assets." Elias didn't move. He simply looked up from his tablet. Councilman Thorne sent his regrets, Alpha. He, along with the rest of the council, has departed for the northern border for an urgent diplomatic inspection. An inspection? Authorized by whom? Lady Lisa, Elias supplied, a faint edge of amusement creeping into his voice. Before she departed, she cited concerns over the Northern Alliance tribute payment. David sank onto one of the unadorned banquet chairs, running a hand through his hair. He was surrounded by wealth, but he couldn't spend a dime. He had an army, but he couldn't move them. He was a king in name, sitting in an empty, half-decorated hall, with a weeping mistress and a kingdom that had quietly, efficiently, stopped answering his calls. "David," Seraphina said, stepping closer, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "You need to fix this. My brother will be here in 2 hours. The tribute must be paid, or he will lose face." David looked at her, really looked at her, for a long moment. He saw the genuine panic in her eyes, but beneath it, he saw something else, something frantic and demanding. The faded bond hummed in his chest, a warm comfort, but the cold reality of the ledger, sitting on Lisa's desk, was suddenly very real. "Your brother," David said slowly, "will have to wait." Seraphina gasped. "Wait? He cannot wait, David. The Northerners—" She stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth, realizing she had said too much. David's eyes narrowed. "The Northerners what, Sarah?" Lisa sat in a small, unremarkable cafe on the outskirts of the city, sipping black tea. The cafe was a known neutral zone, favored by couriers and information brokers. She was dressed simply, blending in with the afternoon crowd, but her posture remained impeccably straight. She checked her phone. The updates from Elias were concise and satisfying. The banquet was officially canceled. The merchants were threatening a strike. Marcus held the army in check. The council was safely out of David's reach. The dominoes were falling exactly as planned. A woman slid into the booth across from her. She was tall, striking, with hair the color of spun copper and eyes that missed nothing. This was Anya, the alpha of the Riverfall pack, Seraphina's older, estranged sister. "You have a lot of nerve calling me here, Lisa," Anya said, her voice a low purr. She didn't bother with a greeting. "And you have a lot of debt, Anya," Lisa countered evenly, taking a sip of her tea. Anya bristled, her eyes flashing gold for a fraction of a second. "Riverfall handles its own affairs. Riverfall is currently trying to handle its affairs using Silverpine's treasury," Lisa said, leaning forward slightly. "I know about your brother's gambling debts to the northern warlords. I know the tribute payment was meant to cover them. And I know Seraphina's sudden, fated mate bond with my husband was less about destiny and more about a desperate bid for insolvency." Anya's facade cracked slightly. She looked around the cafe, ensuring no one was listening, before leaning in. "You have no proof." "I have the frozen wire transfers," Lisa said, tapping her phone. "Transfers initiated by Seraphina this morning, attempting to route Silverpine funds to dummy corporations in the north. My cipher blocked them." Anya let out a long, slow breath. slumping slightly in the booth. My brother is a fool, and Serafina is a naive child who thought she could play queen and save him. Serafina nearly started a war, Lisa corrected sharply. If Silverpine defaults on the Northern Tribute because the funds were siphoned to pay a personal debt, the warlords will attack. They've been looking for an excuse. Anya rubbed her temples. What do you want, Lisa? You didn't call me here just to gloat. I want to protect my pack, and surprisingly, I want to help yours. Anya looked up, suspicious. Why? Because a destabilized riverfall creates a vulnerable border for Silverpine, Lisa stated pragmatically, and because I despise unnecessary bloodshed. Lisa slid a sleek, black folder across the table. What is this? It's a debt consolidation plan, Lisa explained. I have quietly purchased your brother's markers from the Northern warlords through a proxy. Anya stared at her, stunned. You bought his debt? Yes, the warlords are impatient. They took a lower payout in exchange for immediate cash. Cash from my personal accounts, not Silverpine's. Lisa tapped the folder. Riverfall no longer owes the North. You owe me. Anya opened the folder, scanning the documents. The numbers were staggering, but the terms Lisa had outlined were surprisingly fair. A structured repayment plan tied to Riverfall's agricultural exports. It would be tight, but it wouldn't bankrupt them. Why are you doing this? Anya asked again, genuinely perplexed. My sister stole your husband. Your sister took a man who was easily swayed by a pretty face and a mystical bond, Lisa said, her voice devoid of bitterness. I am securing the stability of the region. Serafina can have David, but she cannot have Silverpine. Lisa leaned back, her eyes hard. Here are my terms. You will accept this restructuring. You will immediately recall your brother and confine him to Riverfall territory. And you will go to the Citadel today. To do what? To retrieve your sister, Lisa said coldly. Explain to her that her attempt to steal Silverpine's treasury has failed. Explain that her family's debts are managed, but only if she ceases her interference in my pack's affairs. And if she refuses to leave? Then she stays, Lisa shrugged. And she can explain to David why the Northern warlords are suddenly knocking on his door, demanding the tribute he can no longer pay. Anya looked at the folder, then at Lisa. You are terrifying, you know that? I am pragmatic, Lisa replied. A queen protects her kingdom, even if she doesn't wear a crown. The late afternoon sun cast long, grim shadows across the great hall. The silence in the citadel was no longer tense. It was defeated. David paced the length of his study. The fated bond with Serafina currently feeling less like a warm hum and more like a low-grade migraine. Her slip of the tongue regarding the Northerners had initiated an argument that ended with her sobbing in the bedchamber. He had tried calling the regional alphas himself. All he received were polite, evasive answers about consulting their financial advisors before committing to any new directives. He was isolated. The heavy oak doors to the study swung open, and Anya strode in, looking like a storm cloud in a tailored suit. Anya, David said, startled. He tried to muster his alpha presence, puffing out his chest. You arrive unannounced. Where is your retinue? I don't have time for protocol, David, Anya snapped, tossing a copy of the black folder Lisa had given her onto his desk. Read it, David frowned, opening the folder. As he scanned the documents, his confusion morphed into horror. These are gambling markers, issued by the Northern warlords to your brother, totaling a sum that would have bankrupted Riverfall, Anya confirmed grimly. and a sum your new mate attempted to pay off this morning using Silver Pine funds. David felt the ground tilt beneath him. Serafina tried to steal the treasury? She tried to save our family, Anya said, though her tone held no defense for her sister. She thought her fated bond gave her the right to use your pack's wealth to cover our debts. She initiated wire transfers to dummy corporations before dawn. David stared at the papers. The transfers failed. Barnaby said the accounts were frozen because Lisa froze them, Anya said, her voice laced with a mixture of awe and frustration. Lisa saw the unauthorized transfers, shut the entire system down. She didn't just freeze the accounts to be petty, David. She did it to stop your mate from committing treason. David sank into his chair, the weight of his own foolishness crushing him. He had thought Lisa was acting out of jealousy. Instead, she had been protecting the pack from a catastrophic theft he hadn't even seen coming. But these markers, David stammered, looking at the documents again. They are stamped paid in full. They are, Anya confirmed. Lisa bought them. David's head snapped up. Lisa, with what money? Her own, through proxies. She negotiated a buyout with the warlords to prevent a border incident. Riverfall now owes the debt to Lisa personally, under terms she dictated. David was speechless. While he had been preening on a dais, crowning a woman who was actively trying to rob him, Lisa had quietly managed a regional crisis, secured his borders, and turned an enemy pack into a heavily indebted ally. Anya leaned over the desk, her expression fierce. Lisa saved your pack today, David. She saved mine too. She is more of a queen than Serafina will ever be. I am taking my sister back to Riverfall. She is my fated mate, David said, though the words sounded hollow, even to him. She is a liability, Anya countered. And if you try to keep her here and the pack learns what she tried to do today, they won't just reject her. They will tear her apart. Anya turned on her heel and left the study, heading toward the royal apartments to collect her sister. David sat alone in the quiet room. The grand illusions of power, the romantic notions of destiny, they were all crumbling. He looked at the shattered mahogany on his desk, where he had struck it earlier that morning. He had broken the desk in a fit of rage over an administrative block. But Lisa hadn't broken anything. She had simply let go of the reins, and the entire chariot had crashed. He needed her back. Not as a wife, perhaps. The bond with Serafina, however tainted by her actions, was still real. But he needed her mind. He needed her control. He needed his Luna. He reached for the secure phone on his desk, the one line he knew she couldn't block. He dialed her private number. It rang once, twice. Speak. Lisa's voice was crisp and cold. Lisa? David said, his voice cracking slightly. I saw the files. From Anya. I assume she has collected her sister then? She is packing now, David admitted, the humiliation burning his throat. Lisa, I didn't know about the debt, about the transfers. I know you didn't, David. That's the problem. You never look at the ledger. I need you to come back to the Citadel. He pleaded, desperation seeping into his tone. We need to fix this. The pact needs its Luna. There was a long silence on the line. When Lisa finally spoke, her voice was calm, utterly devoid of the desperation he felt. I am not coming back, David. But the pack is fine, Lisa interrupted smoothly. The treasury is secure. The military is neutral. The merchants will be paid by tomorrow morning from a new, independent trust I've established. The kingdom will continue to function perfectly well. You can't just run it from exile, David shouted, panic setting in. I am the Alpha King. You are a figurehead, David, Lisa said, the truth hitting harder than a physical blow. You wear the crown, but I hold the kingdom. The pack doesn't need you to fix this. They need me to. She paused, and he could almost hear the finality in her next words. Enjoy your mate, David. The kingdom has chosen its queen. The line clicked dead. The sound of a zipper closing cut through the heavy silence of the royal suite like a gunshot. Serafina was weeping, a frantic, ugly sound that lacked the delicate, practiced sorrow she had displayed on the dais the night before. She shoved silk dresses and jewel-encrusted heels into a set of leather trunks, her hands trembling. Anya stood by the doorway, her posture rigid, her face an unreadable mask of stone. Two massive Riverfall enforcers flanked her in the corridor, waiting to escort their wayward sister home. David stood by the fractured mahogany desk, watching the scene unfold with a hollow detachment. The fated bond, which just yesterday had felt like a burning sun in his chest, now felt like a dying ember, suffocated by the cold reality of her betrayal. David, please, Serafina begged, abandoning her packing to run toward him. She grabbed his forearms, her tears staining the white silk of his tunic. You are the Alpha King. You can stop her. You can tell Anya to leave. David looked down at her. He saw the golden hair he had crowned, the delicate features he had sworn to protect. But beneath the surface, he finally saw the desperate, calculating opportunist Lisa had warned him about. Stop her with what, Sarah? David asked, his voice rough and exhausted. With an army that refuses to march? With a treasury that doesn't exist? You tried to rob my people to pay your brother's debts. I did it for us, she cried, her grip tightening. The northern warlords would have come for Riverfall, and then they would have come for you. I was trying to save our future. You were trying to save yourself, David corrected softly, prying her fingers from his arms. He took a step back, the physical distance mirroring the chasm that had opened between them. And in doing so, you handed my entire kingdom over to my wife. Anya stepped forward, her patience exhausted. Enough, Serafina. We are leaving. Be grateful Lady Lisa is merciful. Had she taken this to the Council of Elders, you would be facing execution for high treason, fated mate or not. Serafina let out a wounded sob, casting one last desperate look at David. When he merely turned his head away, she crumpled, allowing her sister to pull her out of the room. The heavy doors clicked shut. David was alone, but the silence didn't last. From beyond the thick glass of the balcony windows, a low rhythmic chanting began to echo across the courtyard. David walked to the glass and looked down. The main gates of the Silver Pine Citadel were swarming. Hundreds of citizens, merchants, guild leaders, off-duty guards, and common pack members had gathered in the fading twilight. They held torches and makeshift signs. The news of the canceled banquet and the frozen accounts had spread like wildfire. David took a deep breath and stepped out onto the balcony. He expected his appearance to command silence, to draw the customary awe. Instead, the chanting grew louder, morphing into a wave of angry shouts. Where is our coin? A voice bellowed from the crowd. Where is the Luna? Another screamed. David gripped the stone balustrade. My people, he yelled, projecting his alpha command. The magic in his voice rolled over them, forcing a temporary, sullen silence. There has been an administrative error. The funds will be released by morning. Return to your homes. An error? The guild master of the bakers stepped forward, his flour-dusted apron stark against the dark crowd. My ovens have been burning for 2 days for your queen's banquet. The suppliers demand payment tonight. Your own financial secretary told us the treasury is locked. It is being handled, David barked, feeling the situation slipping further from his grasp. Suddenly, the heavy iron gates groaned open. The crowd parted, murmuring in confusion. General Marcus rode through the gates on a massive black horse, flanked by a dozen heavily armed guards. For a brief, desperate second, David thought Marcus had come to disperse the crowd, to reassert royal authority. But Marcus didn't order the crowd to disperse. He rode to the center of the courtyard and held up a hand. The citizens immediately fell silent. "People of Silverpine," Marcus's voice boomed, carrying easily in the crisp night air. "You will be paid." David leaned over the balcony, frowning. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Marcus didn't look up at his king. He looked at the crowd. As of 1 hour ago, a new independent trust has been established to handle the Pact's domestic debts, the Silverpine Merchants Trust. It is fully funded and currently dispersing payments at the central bank. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by a tentative, swelling cheer. The guildmaster stepped forward again, removing his cap. "Who funds this trust, General?" "The king." Marcus finally looked up at the balcony. His eyes met David's, cold and unapologetic. "The trust," Marcus declared, "is funded and managed solely by Lady Lisa. Your debts are settled by Her Grace." The cheer that erupted from the courtyard was deafening. It wasn't the polite, forced applause of the coronation. It was a roar of genuine gratitude and fierce loyalty. They began chanting a single name, a name that echoed off the stoned walls of the citadel and pounded against David's chest like a physical blow. "Lisa. Lisa. Lisa." David stumbled back into the dark, empty suite. He had kept the crown, but he had lost the kingdom. 4 days had passed since the night the citadel fell into darkness. The kingdom of Silverpine was thriving. Trade routes buzzed with activity, the northern border was quiet, and the markets were overflowing. The Pact had never felt more secure, and absolutely none of it was being managed from the Alpha King's throne room. David walked through the bustling streets of the lower city, the collar of his dark coat pulled up against the morning chill. For the first time in his life, he walked without a royal escort. When he had ordered his guard to accompany him, General Marcus had politely informed him that the guards were currently deployed on essential infrastructure details authorized by the new trust. He was a ghost in his own city. Citizens bowed their heads respectfully as he passed, but they didn't stop to cheer. Their eyes held a mixture of pity and quiet judgment. He reached the address Elias had given him, a sprawling, fortified estate on the edge of the river, historically used as a summer retreat for the Luna. Now, it was the true capital of Silverpine. 2 massive wolves guarded the iron gates. They didn't kneel when David approached. They merely stepped aside, opening the gates with a heavy clanking of metal. Inside, the estate was a hive of controlled chaos. Couriers rushed across the manicured lawns. Guild leaders sat on the veranda, drinking tea and reviewing ledgers. David bypassed them all, his jaw set, and walked straight into the main hall. Lisa sat at a massive oak table, surrounded by maps and glowing tablets. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her hair pulled back into a severe braid. Elias stood to her right, whispering something into her ear. She looked up as David entered. The room instantly fell dead silent. The couriers stopped mid-stride. The guild leaders held their breath. "Give us the room," Lisa commanded quietly. Within seconds, the hall emptied, leaving only the 2 of them. David stood near the door, feeling smaller than he ever had. He looked at the woman he had humiliated in front of thousands just a week ago. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look angry. She just looked incredibly busy. "You broke my kingdom," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I broke your illusion. Lisa corrected, setting down her pen and folding her hands on the table. The kingdom is functioning perfectly. Better, in fact, without the drain of your vanity projects. David slowly walked toward the table. Anya took Serafina back to Riverfall. The bond. It's quiet. I think the betrayal severed it. Or perhaps it was never as strong as I wanted to believe. I am not interested in your romantic epiphanies, David, Lisa said coldly. Why are you here? David stopped a few feet from the table. He looked at the ledgers, the maps, the undeniable proof of her competence. He remembered the empty, echoing halls of his citadel, the contempt in Marcus's eyes, the cheers of the crowd for a woman who didn't even wear a crown. He slowly sank to his knees. It was a staggering, unnatural movement for an alpha. His pride screamed in protest, but the agonizing truth silenced it. I am asking you to come home, David said, his voice cracking. He bowed his head, staring at the polished wooden floor. I was a fool. I let a legend of fated mates blind me to the reality of what we had built. I cannot lead them, Lisa. They don't want me. They want you. Lisa looked down at him. For 5 years, she had stood in his shadow, managing his messes, securing his victories, while he soaked up the sun. Seeing him on his knees didn't bring her joy. It just brought a cold, pragmatic satisfaction. If I return to the citadel, David, I do not return to the shadows, she said, her voice echoing in the empty hall. I will not be the quiet Luna who balances the books while you take the glory. If I come back, the dynamic changes. Permanently. David looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Whatever you want. Lisa stood up, walking around the table to stand before him. I retain sole control of the treasury. The military reports to a joint council over which I hold veto power, she listed, her tone unyielding. And the pack will know the truth. There will be a new ceremony. You will not crown me as your Luna, David. David swallowed hard. Then what? You will crown me as your equal, as the Queen of Silverpine, Lisa stated. Not by a marriage treaty, not by a fated bond, by right of competence and by the choice of the people. You will be the alpha of the military. I will be the sovereign of the state. We rule side by side, or you rule alone in an empty castle. David looked into her storm-gray eyes. He saw no love there, no forgiveness. But he saw strength. A strength that could hold the northern warlords at bay, a strength that could feed his people. He bowed his head lower. I accept. Good, Lisa said, turning her back on him and walking back to her desk. Stand up, David. An alpha groveling is bad for morale. We have a coronation to plan. The great hall of the Silverpine Citadel was suffocating once more. But this time, the energy was vastly different. There was no ozone tang of anxiety, no whispered gossip behind gloved hands. The air vibrated with a raw, electric anticipation. Every regional alpha, every guild master, every high-ranking military officer was present. The banners were pristine. The lilies were fresh and fully paid for. David stood on the dais. He did not wear the radiant white and gold of a conquering king. He wore the dark, ceremonial armor of the pack's commander. A subtle but profound shift in his presentation. The heavy obsidian crown rested on his brow, but it looked less like a symbol of absolute power and more like a badge of office. The massive oak doors at the end of the hall swung open. The herald slammed his staff against the stone floor. Presenting Lady Lisa, sovereign of the Silverpine State. The crowd didn't wait for a cue. They erupted. The roar was deafening, a wave of pure, unfiltered adoration that shook the crystal sconces. General Marcus and his highest-ranking officers, drew their silver alloy swords, raising them in a glittering archway down the center aisle. Lisa walked through the arch of steel. She wore a gown of deep, blood-red velvet, heavily embroidered with the silver thread of her pack's crest. She wore no jewelry, save for a simple silver chain around her neck. Her head was held high, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, acknowledging their loyalty not with a smile, but with a solemn nod of shared purpose. She reached the base of the dais and stopped. David stepped forward. He didn't order the crowd to rejoice. He simply waited for the roar to naturally subside into a reverent hush. He descended the 3 steps of the dais to stand on equal footing with her. For 5 years, I claimed the victories of Silverpine as my own. David's voice rang out, magically amplified, steady but stripped of its usual arrogance. I stood in the light, while the true architect of our strength labored in the dark. I allowed vanity to blind me to the foundation of our kingdom. He turned to the high priest, who held a velvet cushion, but it wasn't the delicate moonstone diadem of the Luna resting on the velvet. It was a new crown. Forged of dark silver and interlaced with fragments of obsidian, it was a heavy, formidable piece, mirroring the king's crown, but distinct in its design. David took the crown in both hands. "The goddess may guide our spirits," David proclaimed, looking directly into Lisa's eyes. "But it is our queen who secures our survival. I, David of Silverpine, Alpha and Commander, acknowledge my equal." He didn't place the crown on her head. That was the old way. Instead, he held it out to her. Lisa met his gaze. She saw the humility, the genuine acceptance of his new reality. She reached out and took the heavy silver crown from his hands. With deliberate, agonizing slowness, she raised it and placed it on her own head. "I accept the burden of this realm," Lisa said, her voice unamplified. Yet it pierced the silence of the hall with absolute authority. "I rule not by fate, but by merit. I protect what is ours." David took a step back, drew his sword, and dropped to one knee, planting the blade into the stone floor before her. Following their alpha's lead, General Marcus dropped to a knee. Then the regional alphas. Then the guildmasters. Like a wave of dominoes, the entire assembly knelt before the woman who had brought the kingdom to its knees, without spilling a single drop of blood. Lisa looked out over the sea of bowed heads. She had lost a husband, a naive belief in a fairy tale marriage, and a quiet life in the shadows. But as she looked at her people, secure, funded, and fiercely loyal, she knew the trade was worth it. She didn't need a fated mate. She was the queen, and the kingdom was finally hers. True power is rarely the loudest voice in the room or the heaviest crown on a dais. It is the quiet, unbreakable infrastructure that holds the world together when the illusions shatter. Lisa's victory wasn't won through vengeance, but through the undeniable weight of her competence, proving that while fate may suggest a path, merit commands the kingdom. If you enjoyed this story of political intrigue, poetic justice, and a woman taking back her power, please consider hitting the like button. Share this story with fellow fans of Alpha King dramas who love a brilliant, calculating heroine. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, cinematic fiction and dramatic tales.